Hello and welcome, dear audience, in the new episode of Great Talks with Dr. Anand Kulkarni. As we discussed last time, and decided rather last time, that we should have a separate and continuous episode of postcolonialism because we are still inquiring about the various issues and critics. So, this is the second episode dedicated to the discussion of postcolonialism. I welcome Dr. Anand Kulkarni. I welcome my co host Ghanasham Borate. So we have discussed in the last episode about basically three major founding fathers, Homi Bhabha, Edward Said, and Franz Fanon. But of course, no discussion of post-colonialism can be complete without discussion of Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. We know her as a translator of Derrida's works, and she is very famous for that. But her other identity is that is of a post-colonial critic. So, how to begin today's episode with that note that how we actually assess the contribution of Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak in this context of post-colonialism, and another a sub question to that, that what exactly how she linked, especially the gender issues, with post-colonialism. So already there were issues regarding post-colonialism were related to race, ethnicity, and class. So how this new dimension of gender was added by Chakravarti Spivak to post-colonialism, and how it impacted the entire study of post-colonialism. So if you could enlighten us on that matter, we can start our discussion on that particular point.
Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak provided other alternative modes of understanding colonial and post-colonial situations, especially the feminist approach. She came out with a feminist approach, which probably pioneered a feminist study in India. She considers herself to be a post-structuralist, deconstructionist, Marxist feminist writer. So that I think this qualification itself speaks about the multiplicity of the approaches that she would like to maintain. And I think there is no harm in doing that, because then you have to be very interdisciplinary and try to bring in as many important ideas and points into the understanding of the crisis. And she has done that, and done very ably as well. Some critics have disagreements with, but then that is the beauty of criticism. I think that there is always a space for criticism, and then you come out with your own perception, and then you continue to argue. So from that point of view also, I think we should accept this. She wrote a very famous essay, we all know, Can the Subaltern Speak? She has written a lot, of course, including her very famous translation of Grammatology by Jacques Derrida. She has written so many books. For example, The Death of the Discipline. So in all of these endeavors that Spivak has undertaken, we shall see that there are three important discourses that she has proposed. One is about the marginalized voices, minority people in India, including women. The other is the Western domination in Indian academy and the Western influences that she has tried to resist. And third, she has tried to interpret Indian post-colonial issues with the help of the Marxist deconstructionist ideas. So these are the three discourses, I think, that we should take into account when we are concerned with, or when we would like to understand Spivak's contribution to Indian post-colonial criticism. Spivak has been a towering figure, we all know, and that she has done a phenomenal work as far as post-colonial studies is concerned, post-colonial criticism is concerned. Not just for this reason, we would be impressed by her contribution in the feminist field, especially in Indian feminist field. She has been a pioneering figure from that point of view, because she has applied many of the Western ideas, and she has given a strong theoretical foundation to the feminist movement in India. That is what we have to understand as far as Spivak is concerned. There are some other opposing counter discourses also as far as Indian post-colonial criticism is concerned. Before that, I think I should make a mention of Gauri Vishwanathan. She wrote a very influential book by the title Masks of the Conquest, in which she tried to interpret how Indian education system was being very deceptively appropriated by the British colonizers in India, and how they used British Indian education system in order to perpetuate their rule in India. So that again is another cultural discourse, I think. Uh, Vishwanathan provides the researchers a very different perspective, a different frame of analysis with the help of this Indian education system. And she records the micro level planning, the micro level undertakings by the Britishers in India, and how they appropriated Indian education system in order to consolidate their rule in India. So that is one very important discourse, I think, that those who are interested in the study of post-colonial criticism should take note of. Then, as I was earlier saying, that there are some opposite and counter discourses also. Two of them I should make mention of. One of Ejaz Ahmed, and some of you might be knowing that Ahmed has been a wonderfully great Indian Marxist critic. And Ejaz has opposed the Orientalist approach of Edward Said in an exciting review that he wrote of Orientalism. He criticized Said for homogenizing the local differences and for creating a counter to Orientalism which subsumes all varieties. That is one way of doing that. Other is, as I said, he's an extremely great Indian Marxist critic for the reason that he has that native turn, that inside view, that necessary indigenous perspective through which he looks upon various Indian marginalized, minority, suppressed, repressed communities and voices, and applies Marxist notions from the native point of view. So I think Ahmed should be considered as one of the important counter discourse making theorists as far as post-colonial theory is concerned. And Ahmed's very famous book, we all know, In Theory, in which he has come out with how third worldism has been intentionally designed by the West, and even those Indians who are West-based also, who are playing at the hands of the Western academia, and how they have tried to impose their ideas on Indian academia, and how we have fallen victim to those Western-sponsored, Euro-sponsored ideas. So that is again a wonderful study. I think those who are interested in post-colonial criticism should read and understand in theory and other writings and speeches that Ahmed has given. With Ahmed, we have another two very prominent Indian critics. One is Meenakshi Mukherjee and another is Harish Trivedi. Again, they are Indian critics rooted over here. They have indigenous flavor and they have their own insights and perceptions. And Mukherjee raises the same questions from the other side of the perspective that Ahmed has raised, though she is not a decidedly Marxist critic like Ahmed is. But Meenakshi Mukherjee and Harish Trivedi have raised some of the important issues concerning post-colonial criticism. And they have come out with the opposite ideas, how the post-colonial critics and theorists have tried to bring in the Western ideas in the Indian garb and Indian disguise, and they have tried to oppose them and have tried to formulate indigenous native discourses which would perhaps help us understand post-colonial situations, colonial and post-colonial situations uh, in the present situation. So I think these are some of the important things that we have to take into account as far as post-colonial criticism is concerned.
So, sir, actually, it is a great combination of so many views. So, you mentioned African writers, you mentioned Said, and then you mentioned Indian writers. So, it is not just a single view that would be useful to study post-colonial theory. That is what probably the entire argument that you are trying to pose. So, continue to that. My question is, when it comes to, for example, research, because many researchers are now taking up either the entire theory or some aspect of it. Like many people are working on identity crisis and such ideas. So when budding researchers are using this particular theory, what approach they should have, and of course, what precautions they should take.
Okay, this is an applied based question. Fine. And before that, I think you mentioned the African variety of African version of post-colonial criticism. I should mention a few very prominent writers and critics, and then we shall pass on to the answer of your question. We have two opposite discourses again in Africa, in African post-colonial criticism. One that constitutes the Western influence over the African writers and critics, like Ole Soyinka and Chinua Achebe and Derek Walcott, and especially Ole Soyinka and Achebe have been very vocal. They have been very articulate in recording and registering the influences of the West and how the Western influences have in some way contributed in understanding and discovering the lost identity of the African people during the colonized period. So that constitutes one perspective, one discourse. I think the counter discourse has been led by the prominent African writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Thiong'o has written a wonderful book by the title Decolonizing the Mind, in which he undertakes the critique of the Western influence over the African intellectual, academic, and even literary studies. And he attempts to formulate an opposing, resisting discourse, wherein he tries to bring the entire focus on the African indigenous native mode of study of the African post-colonial period. So I think even African post-colonial criticism is equally very prominent, equally very strong, as much as Indian post-colonial criticism has been. We can refer to other versions as well. You rightly pointed out, post-colonial criticism is not a singular, uniform perspective or discourse. It consists of a lot of discourses, and because there is a lot of variety, there is a lot of plurality in the approaches and discourses. I think post-colonial criticism turns out to be a very attractive and very promising site of resistance, site of reflection, both. Coming to the question that you raised about research, application of post-colonial criticism, I think the first thing that we should do is we should start reading post-colonial criticism, post-colonial theory, right from Frantz Fanon. Black skin, white mask. That is how it should begin with. Correct. And then it should be followed by the important theoretical studies, theoretical arguments carried out by various critics and theorists that we have mentioned earlier.
So even Wretched of the Earth would be useful in that sense.
Yeah, of course. It is quite wonderful for the reason that Fanon applies psychoanalytic criticism, psychoanalytic frame for the analysis of the African identity, followed by other great theorists like Baba and Said and Spivak and Gauri Vishwanathan, and even the Indian post-colonial critics. I did not mention even the rest of them, Even the leading critics and theorists in India have been very prominent, and we should turn to them as well. Not just, I should mention importantly over here, and special mention should be made that even Indian post-colonial critics from different Indian languages, including Hindi and Marathi and Bengali and even South Indian languages, also should be taken note of, because they have been very great thinkers, very great critics, and we should not forget that they have also contributed in very different ways.
So those who have written in Indian languages, that is what you are saying.
Written in Indian languages, they may not have been rendered into English, but that does not disqualify them from entering into the post-colonial arena, and that they equally deserve our attention as well, and the merit of consideration. So that, I think, should be made a mention as well. So a study should be made. My first point is, as far as research or application of post-colonial criticism is concerned, we should make the study of a proper study of, or should I use a word, a proper grounding into post-colonial criticism. And I think those who are interested in doing research in post-colonial criticism should be aware of the fact that they should not take offhand and non-theoretical approach, because then that deprives them of a theoretical framework, and there is every chance that you may slip from, or you may deviate from the topic that you have chosen, and there will be nothing that will be substantial that shall be there at the end of your research. So from that point of view also, I think it's important that you need to have some theoretical framework. These writers and critics and theorists, not necessarily those who write in English, but those who write in different Indian languages also, can of course be taken note of, and it is rewardable also that we recognize them and bring in their theoretical frameworks in our research. Some of them must have been translated into English as well. For example, Bharatiya Sahitya Akademi must have published some of the good books over them. So that also contributes to our study. So first is that we have a proper grounding, a proper understanding of the concepts. Second is that we need to have a theoretical framework. Third one is, it is important that we choose a very proper topic. And I would suggest, as far as my experience is concerned, that we better go for Indian study, in place of other topics, because that is very close to our culture, because we have a first-hand experience of those things, and because I think that would throw a very searching light over some of the perspectives or issues which are directly concerned with we as Indians. So that is another thing as far as the choice of topic is concerned. Finally, I think it is important that we have to remain loyal to the text that we have taken for our research purpose. Most of us, perhaps, I think, go for selecting certain texts and trying to say, for example, I want to study the concept of hybridity, Baba's hybridity, into certain texts. So it is important that the texts that we choose or select for our study should contain those things. And for that, you should have a prior to research reading of the text that you would like to choose. That has to be there. Otherwise, you have to struggle very hard to find out whether hybridity is there. And usually, the result is very pessimistic, that your topic and your conclusions do not usually match. So that is important, again, that we have to read the texts properly and try to find out whether the perspective that you have chosen is there in the texts or not. And finally, I think we should become aware of the interdisciplinary approach. That is very important. Indian researchers and academicians interested in post-colonial studies, post-colonial criticism, should take note of this emerging and very important trend of interdisciplinarity, that we should be aware of that. For example, geography and politics have become very important in globalized period. Economy has also become very important. These can be very important considerations, I think, in the study of research. Not necessarily that we should limit ourselves to the literary or to the linguistic. There are other surrounding contexts which have made a heavy influence over our study of literature that I think should be taken note of. Those things should be brought into the study so that we can have very different ideas, very different aspects through which we can better understand the Indian context, the present that we are living in. And why should not we go for the research of the present writers? Why should we go for the Indian classical writers? By classical I mean classical modern Indian writers, because they have been overworked, over-researched. There are upcoming prominent Indian writers writing in different languages, and some of them have been translated into English. I think they should also be taken note of. And as I said, we should maintain the multidisciplinary approach and not just literary and linguistic.
Yes.
That would perhaps take us to very different revelations.
Yeah. So I think you are provided a kind of advice to all the people who are now on the verge of registering their topics or still finalizing their topics. You mentioned about all the steps. Even you said that there are writers, critics who have contributed from regional languages. I think even that would be a good research topic, that if some of us can take their original writing and translate that into English to begin with.
Exactly.
Even that itself could be a very good beginning point of research, so that others can take help of it. So I think, sir, because of your discussion, so many topics are in a way revealed to the researchers, I think, in today's talk. Sham, I request you to make concluding remarks and conclude this session.
Sure. With this session, I'm sure the students and the researchers and the teachers have been enlightened into different aspects of post-colonial theory, the theories which influence post-colonial theory, as well as the theories which were influenced by the post-colonial theory. I'm sure teachers and the students would like to delve deep into concepts like race, gender, ethnicity, hybridity, or even identity crisis, and come up with substantial research into these fields. With these words, I thank your contribution in this particular talk. I ask the viewers to subscribe to our channel, Wise Words and Crit Talks with Dr. Anand Kulkarni.